Welcome, everybody, to this joint podcast of Tel Aviv Diary, with together with the Rabbi's Notes with Rabbi Joshua Hammerman.
How about the notebook? It's
Notebook.
good.
Okay, it's good. Okay. I've known Rabbi Hammerman, I guess, now for about 20 plus years, since we got to know each other
Yeah.
together as we were starting what was Westchester Fairfield Hebrew Academy way back when. So, Rabbi Hammerman, welcome. You've had a very successful uh, um, Substack, a
Yes.
new career altogether. You said when you left the pulpit, you were looking for a new career in writing, and you certainly found it. So,
Yes. And welcome to you, Mark. And I welcome in my subscribers as well who are watching this. Marc Schulman is one of the great experts on Israel, from Israeli media, from his own educational websites, and from his work as an educator and a writer. So it's thrilling to be here with you. And yes, we've known each other from way back.
okay. Well, I'm here in America on a 2 week trip, so I thought it would be a good time to talk about what's going on in American Jewry partially. And I know you want to explore some views of what's going on in Israel, so we'll try to go back and forth between them.
Yes.
We discussed before we started the podcast today what sort of changes I've seen in American Jewry in America when I'm back here. It's the first time I've been here in over a year, and my
Things have
general
changed a
sense
lot, right?
really have really have the
Yeah.
sense of concern and fear is very real this time, much more so. I mean, you could feel it a little bit after October 7th and October 8th and what took place on the campuses, but it's this cumulative effect that I fear that's affected people. And the election of Mamdani in New York, New York Jews have certainly been affected by that. So I see real concern here about what the long term future is, and that things could be changing, combined with the sudden rise of or revival. I shouldn't say rise of anti-Semitism on the Republican right, which is very concerning, I think, for everybody. What do you see?
Well, I mean, I'm a little detached from regular show life as an emeritus, so I've gotten a chance to actually go around to different places and also watch online, watch other services occasionally on YouTube. And what I'm sensing is a real concern among American Jews, a fear. It's almost like people are surprised when there hasn't been some kind of anti-Semitic incident in a Jewish community. Not violent ones necessarily, although we certainly have seen that in Michigan and elsewhere. But even just the vandalism and the graffiti, or just people people online who are trolling. It's we're seeing an awful lot of anti-Semitism grow. I will say that in the mainstream of American Jewry, which I sort of try to tap into with my Substack. The concern for Mamdani is there, but it's certainly not as much as it would be in the New York area itself. Um, Three-quarters of American Jews still vote Democratic. They understand that there are concerns in the Democratic Party, that Israel is now demonized. And I think the most significant change that you will have seen in your trip here is that Israel is now um, really not liked by most Americans. I mean, by the majority, which is shocking for two of us who've grown up in a country where bipartisan support for Israel was always there. Israel is not liked, but the focus especially is on Netanyahu and his government, which I think is somewhat of a plus that people are able to distinguish between Israel, the idea, Israel, the historic democracy, and Israel as it is right now. It's hard to make that distinction, but I think Americans are beginning to be able to do that, and I hope to encourage that.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And, we all hope, at least most Israelis that I know, I live in Tel Aviv, so it's a bubble, but everyone I know actually in Tel Aviv is hoping that there'll be a new government come October. But it's questionable to me how much things will change. In other words, yes, the government will change. I think Naftali Bennett was asked recently by someone at a conference my son attended, and he was asked, what will you do to improve the relations or recover the relations with world Jewry and with the world generally? And he said, first thing first, I'll stop people from saying stupid things.
That would help.
That would certainly help. But the damage has been done in that sense. The Gaza war, I would have fought differently if I was in charge. But there would have been a Gaza war regardless whether it was Netanyahu. Maybe there wouldn't have been because someone else might have stopped it. But assuming the war had broken out,
Well,
it
there
would have
may
been a
not have been
terrible
an
war in
October
any
7th.
case. Right?
So,
Maybe not. Maybe not. But but leaving that part aside, assuming there had been a surprise, um, I don't know how different the war would have looked if someone else had been in charge. You remember, Gantz and Eisenkot were part of the war cabinet through the first half of the war. So, genocide was being thrown around really quickly. So, I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah, I mean, on the left fringe, certainly among in the universities, Palestinian supporters, rallied, seized that moment to attack Israel. But I don't think it was resonating until Israel didn't seem to care. It certainly didn't care about what American Jews think. What shocks me is the political malpractice within the Israeli government of disregarding American public opinion. Forget about the Jewish public opinion and in allowing it to slide. I think that is the existential threat that Israel faces right now, perhaps even more than what's going on with Iran. Losing American support, and I think that can be turned around, but it's so crucial. I do think, I'm sort of a believer in the great man theory, great person theory. I believe that, Biden changed the atmosphere immediately when he became president after Trump won. We need it even more after Trump too. Whoever comes next, and a Democratic Congress will help, could start to lower the temperature on this end by not having so many provocations, so many wars, so many irrational attacks. And on the Israeli end, I really believe that, I've never been a big fan of Naftali Bennett, but anyone would be better. Bibi is so demonized now. He's become such a boogeyman in America that anyone would be better. And he would get a listen. People would listen to him. And his English is good. Lapid's English is good. They'd be able to begin to turn the tide.
But it would also wouldn't be a one man government. I was listening to a podcast from it's called Echad Bayom, One a Day, and it was talking about how decisions are being made currently in the Israeli government. Well, they're not. There's one person. There's not a National Security Council that's meeting. There are no options. The National Security Council that existed no longer has a head, so no one's providing, opposing opinions, options. It's all one person.
Yeah,
Bibi Netanyahu is making all the decisions, and also he's the only spokesman for the country. I mean, he's the only one in the government who speaks normal English, which is the most baddest part.
right.
He's appointing someone to be the head of the Mossad who doesn't speak English. It's mind-boggling, actually, when you think about it. Um, but
Well, we got it worse. So
yes,
basically, two people decided to start a war. I mean, Bibi and Trump. And so the question over here now, I mean, all the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, are that Bibi, was able to manipulate Trump into going to this war. I think that it's almost universally accepted now. It's very scary how this conspiracy theory, which probably contains a grain of truth, but I also believe that Trump succeeded in charming Israel and Bibi, but especially Israel over the last 10 years with his sort of love bombing, embracing right wing Israeli policies to the point where they can't say no to him. So it's like who's manipulating who here? But it's two people who are taking two peoples to war
yep. Without any rational consensus of additional advisors and everything else. I mean,
or a
I like
plan.
no. Look, the United States now has one person who's Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. The last time that happened was during the Vietnam War at the end, when Henry Kissinger took both jobs. But he took that after being National Security Advisor for 5 years. And as much as I sort of like Marco Rubio, I think he's a bit of a lightweight, but I sort of like him. But compared to Henry Kissinger, we're talking about light years. And so it's insane. It's completely insane at this point.
Yeah, yeah,
But
and Rubio is the most serious of all the
right,
cabinet members,
right, he has
despite the fact that
experience.
he's
He
a
was
lightweight.
right. He was a senator for a number of years. Talked about foreign policy. He has some idea about foreign policy. No, absolutely. But the problem for Israelis with Trump, and I think the majority of Israelis who I speak to at this
Are
point
they going to
realize
fall
that
out of love with him? Because,
it's
most
yes and no.
Americans, most Americans want him out at this point, and American Jews as well. I mean, it's
Look,
not 50-50 anymore. It's his ratings are in the low 30s. So
is, Israelis realize, even the ones who love him, that he's not reliable. He lies. You can't tell from today to tomorrow. He'll say three things in 1 hour, each one contradicting each other. So there's no question that Israelis understand that. They're beginning to understand the fact that we're in bed with somebody who is not always rational, or at least doesn't seem rational in what he's doing. On the other hand, there's never been anyone as pro-Israel as him in the White House, without any limitations.
I would even put Nixon over him, and that's hard for me to do. I
Yeah,
think I mean, he's given everyone, their sugar high of the embassy in Jerusalem and settlements. But he hasn't really helped. I think Biden helped Israel a lot more during the early stages, after October 7th, and even Obama with the tough love. I mean, I was in favor of the Iran deal. I think the alternative now has turned out to not be so great.
no, I was fully in favor of the Iran deal. I was fully opposed and spoke quite forcefully against leaving the deal, saying, "What's your plan B?" I mean, the problem with the Iran deal is it's sunset. So instead, we self sunsetted it. What was the logic there? There was no logic at all to ending that deal, except Netanyahu could show, look what I did. I got Trump to leave the deal. It was a terrible deal. He was the one who came and said what a terrible deal it was. We all have to remember that the problems with the Democratic Party probably started with his speech in the Congress against
Yeah.
Obama.
I was
That
at
was
APAC that year.
right,
Yeah, it was also the beginning of the end for APAC.
right.
Um, it could never be partisan again.
No, I and APAC is a whole other problem. But that was the beginning of the now. There were other issues, the issues there would be issues today, and I don't think Rashid Tlaib would ever love us, regardless of whether Netanyahu spoke in the UN, and a few other of her friends would hate us regardless. But it didn't have to be the way it is, and I think we're partially responsible for that. So it's a real challenge. But I think, when I look at it, the greater challenge right now for American Jewry, ultimately for Israel, is what's happening in the Republican Party. The
Yes.
fact that traditional anti-Semitism has reemerged. It's always been there under the, under the, well, underneath. It was always there. I mean, I did almost a PhD thesis on why Jews were voting for Democrats. This is in the 1980s, when, economically they should have been Republican, right? They were economically voting should be Republican, and they were voting as if they were, quote unquote, at those times we say Puerto Ricans in terms of their economic interests.
Right.
And my conclusion was there's such thing as symbolic politics, and to Jews, symbolic politics basically works out to be anti-Semitism. And the Republican Party back then was the party of the closed country club, was the party that had no Jewish Congress people. It was the party of anti-Semites, where the Democratic Party was the one who was receiving Jews and all those things. And for a number of years, it sort of disappeared. Something happened in America um, when the talk was Judeo-Christian culture, right? It was said so many times. At first, I thought it was just trying to be PC. But over the years, it almost became ingrained in a lot of people's thoughts. And now it suddenly stopped. And Jews thought they were inside the tent, but amongst white right wing Republicans at this point, we're now outside the tent. And
Yeah.
that's dangerous.
I think what we're seeing now with the blaming of Israel for all of America's woes. I mean, the Iran war is just the most recent example and most vivid example. But Bibi has become sort of the Rasputin, who's manipulating America. It's every anti-Semitic theory thrown into one. And we're killing babies, and we're doing all of the things that people have accused us of in the last 2,000 years, including deicide. Um, it's coming back to us. And now we're throwing this messianic twist in, which the Republicans are doing even more than the Democrats. This whole apocalyptic notion, this onward Christian soldiers that Hegseth, is turning this war into. There's no place for Jews, not only in that kind of scenario, but in that country, in a country like that. So now we're also seeing, and they're not saying Judeo-Christian anymore. They want to put the Ten Commandments on the walls of every classroom in Texas and in the country. I mean, ultimately, they're going to destroy the church-state separation that has preserved us for so
Right.
long as unique people in this country. The Jews have been able to thrive here. I just wonder if they're going to, next to the adultery commandment, throw the Texas Attorney General Paxton's picture up there, whose wife, divorced him,
Yes.
on the basis of adultery, and throw in President Trump while we're
I'm
at
about to
it.
say, President Trump was obviously the most chaste president in American history. Never once cheated on any of his wives. So please,
Absolutely,
yes.
absolutely. But Ten Commandments, it's just symbolic of all that they're trying to do here, which I think is extremely dangerous. And it's short-sighted for American Jews not to see that, and for Israelis not to see the threat to American Jews. I mean, all right, I want to say one thing, Mark. You know, I've been less than sympathetic toward what you've been through and spending the last couple of years basically, in bomb shelters. And I think American Jews need to understand that. But I think Israelis also need to understand just the tumult that this administration has caused for us on so many levels, church and state being the most, visibly Jewish centric of them, anti-Semitism as well, but also in some of the social justice concerns that we've had from our Judaism over the centuries, and finally our concern for democracy. At this point, and I've sort of made this my rule number one, all that matters is winning the midterms. All that matters is beating Trump. Everything
Okay, so
else needs to be put aside until we can do that.
okay, so it's interesting because there's a parallel and there's a lack of parallel. What do I mean by a parallel? So this past 3+ years started with the attempt of quote unquote judicial reform, which is a close parallel to what Trump is doing in different ways, but a close parallel. And it brought out 1 million Israelis to the streets to try to stop the attempt of the government to turn Israel into less of a democracy, to eliminate the one part of the government that was protecting democracy and providing some sort of checks and balances in the Israeli system. The Israeli system does not have checks and balances, which we could spend an hour discussing what's wrong with the Israeli system, but it doesn't have checks and balances. So for 6 months, 7 months, every Saturday night, except when I visited the United States, I was out on the streets of Tel Aviv every single Saturday night. I didn't miss one Saturday night. I was there. My son was there. We were always out. My wife was there. We were always out every Saturday night protesting what the government was trying to do. Went to Jerusalem a few times. We felt we were somewhat successful. As we slowed it down, we slowed it to a crawl and at least seemed to be stopping it. But then came the war. And that was a different experience altogether. And you can't, American Jews, I don't think they understand from a distance, but I don't think they quite get what this war has been like for Israelis. First of all, it's been long. First of all, one of the statistics that came about recently that I hadn't known, the fact of the matter is that before the war, only 4% of Israelis were doing reserve duty. And now it's close to 9%. We're talking about Israelis of the proper age and Jews, right? I'm not talking about the Arabs and I'm not talking about others. So Israeli Jews doing reserve duty, that's 9%. Before the war, they were doing an average of 11 days. Now they're doing an average of 200 days. So you can imagine 200 days of not being with your family, not being at work, not being all those sort of things. It's breaking the country. It really is amongst those age groups. And you add to that, if you lived up north, you had to leave your homes. If you lived by the Gaza border, well, pretty soon it became more or less safe in the Gaza border area after 6 months. And suddenly, if you lived in Tel Aviv, you went through two extreme periods. Um, 12 days, I guess it was last June, or 1 or 2 days in between before that. And now for 6 weeks, where life basically stopped and you spent your time looking to see when the next missile was going to reach you. Um, and that's a profound experience. And everything that you described um, in terms of American Jewry's concerns, etc., Israel is a concern, but only in the okay. You got your problems. We have our very, very specific problems. Running to the shelter and spending, not sleeping through any night, basically. That's a very different situation than worrying theoretically about the future of democracy and social movements, etc. So it's different, different on scale. Now, on the other hand, Israelis are also have the same view that you do. We're looking towards end of October. You're looking towards November to try to change the trajectory of the country. And everyone I know is involved in some way of trying to do that. So we're not ignoring that, but it's been a different experience, and I don't think American Jews understand as much as we don't understand American Jews these days. I think the other way also is very clear, and there is not that understanding.
Right.
So,
We have been on the front lines for generations to defend Israel and willingly wanting to be. I mean, obviously, we're not, in the battle itself, although I think now we more or less are online and in the universities, etc. But when our kids are coming back to us and saying, Israel's racist, Israel's committing genocide, and it's Jewish kids,
right.
and it's Jews. I mean, I think that the profound sense of being enclosed, of being surrounded, is now we're besieged as well in a different way. I think we want to help. I think American Jews generally do want to help. My question is this: I mean, can we envision a scenario? If Israel had to go into Gaza. They had to do a lot of the damage they did. The way Hamas was set up, embedded in the population. I think we understood that. If there hadn't been a Ben Gvir and a Smotrich doing what they were doing on the West Bank at the same time and still doing it, and doing what they were doing to the Israeli judicial system at the same time, I don't, I mean, the anti-Semites would have been out there, but I just don't think there would be this overwhelming, pouring out of hatred toward Israel in America right now. I mean, I'd
No,
like to believe that that can change even with a right-wing Bennett, but a civil one, you know.
okay. I hope you're right. I question it because what we're seeing, and we look at the numbers, right? The numbers reflect the younger people are by far not sympathetic to Israel, don't like Israel. We look at the Pew poll, and
By
even
far.
Republican, right? So,
It's not
but
even
why?
close.
But why is it the huge difference between young and old? That part of it is history. That's one of the explanations that we give older people. First of all, they understand a little bit of history. I hate to say this as someone who tried my whole life to teach history and failed on the global sense. Kids say they don't know history. I don't care. They graduate college and they still don't know any history and understand any history. But we'll leave that part aside. I think there's something else very much at work. Where do these people get their messaging? They get it from TikTok. They get it from Instagram. They get it from visual sources that are full of terrible visual sources that exist. Some of them fake, but they're there. After October 7th, we made a decision that in retrospect was probably very wrong. We did not want to show the bodies. We did not want to show the beheaded people. We didn't want to show the terrible atrocities that took place. So none of those images got out. So on TikTok and all those places, what do you see? Images of dead Palestinians of one kind or another constantly. Same thing on Instagram and all those places. And I think it's a phenomenon. I read an interesting report that doesn't relate to us, but it maybe says a lot. There's been a rise in support for Catholicism recently in the United States amongst youth. And what was the reason? Because Catholicism is much more about images, and Protestantism is much more textual based. And the images are working amongst young people where they're seeing it again. TikTok and Instagram, visual media is much more. And I think we lose that war, which we hardly fought, by the way. The other
But
part of the problem.
we also have a pope who cries out on behalf of people who are oppressed and poor, and it serves as an incredible contrast to Trump, as the most famous American in the world, and in some ways most powerful, meaning the Pope, as opposed to Trump. But I agree with you in lots of ways, but I have to keep coming back to if we study history, the Israeli government and the Knesset, they kept Kahana out of the Knesset
Right.
for generations. They kept, even as Israel fought off a certain degree of Jewish nationalism, which, we are a nation. There will be nationalism. I get that. But nationalism as opposed to Jewish supremacist nationalism, which is the Kahana force that's in the Knesset now, that's in the government at its highest levels. That, we just saw a story last week. It seems almost trivial, but a guy who was wearing a conservative Jew, a Masorti Jew, was wearing a kippah with an Israeli and a Palestinian flag on it,
That's
was
Alex, right?
arrested.
Yes, yes, I know.
Yes.
Uh,
I mean that's ridiculous. That's not going to look good on TikTok or anywhere. And American Jews have to try to defend that, which of course we can't. We got to get Kahana out, and in America we got to get Hegseth and his apocalyptic version of Christian nationalism out, and then I think we can start talking.
Possibly. I hope so. I hope you're right. Look, Bibi had said he would never allow Ben Gvir to be a cabinet minister in his cabinet.
He
And
wouldn't even take a
then,
picture with him.
right, but then, he needed it. He's indicted, he's on trial. He refuses to leave the scene. He absolutely refuses to leave the scene. I'm still optimistic that in the next 3 months, if the polls remain the way they are, that he might take a plea deal and leave us.
I think
Um,
he will. I think,
I hope so, but people seem to cling to power in ways that you and I, well, you were tired from the pulpit, right? That was your
you're right.
PowerPoint, right? More than anything else, that's where you had power in a
I think
sense.
Substack's better for me, but you're right.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
but us normal people don't cling to power in the same way that some of these politicians do.
Both Bibi
Uh,
and Trump think that they are messiahs. They do think that they're saviors or that God has chosen them, or that some way they have this mystical sense that they're always going to win.
right. Well,
And
I think
Bibi,
there's no question that Bibi thinks that only he can save the Jewish people. That's his view. I know for a fact he basically, when he was a young um, counsel, economic counsel in Washington, this goes back a long, long time, but I have him firsthand that he basically said, "You got to protect me because I'm going to be the savior of the Jewish people and be prime minister one day." So he said that to his Kabbat, his defense, the people who have to defend the embassy way back when. So he's been obsessed with this idea for a long time. So um, I don't know. It's a difficult time. I'm hoping he wakes up soon. Um,
so
I hope
I
we can
mean,
go there. One of the problem. I want to just bring one of the point is, part of the problem is the battlefield was never fought. The fact of the matter is, I can remember back when I was a student arguing with the Israeli government, saying, "Hey, you get so much aid from the United States, you should be spending more money." The fact of the matter is, Israel never spent the kind of money required in terms of PR, and American Jewry didn't really do it for Israel either. I frankly think instead of sending Israel money, it should deal with the whole PR issue more than anything else. I don't even think American Jewry actually promotes American Jewry in any sort of way that makes any sense.
well, Chabad
Uh,
does. It's about
yeah,
it
okay,
on
that's the
our
problem. We
behalf.
left, right, we
Yeah,
left the field to Chabad. Um,
yeah. See, I also think that, getting back to the apocalyptic stuff, it's more about right and left religiously than it almost is politically, although they're connected. we sort of need to get beyond the messianism and defeat this, ethno-nationalist supremacism that exists in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and certainly within Israel. And it's those forces of moderation that, if they come together, could form an alliance, and I think start something new in the relationship between America and Israel, not just between,
Well, we also need leadership too,
yeah,
and I don't really see it amongst American Jewry. There's no
no,
one
we
who
don't have.
really, we don't have anyone who stands out. There's no
There's no
Heschel.
Isaac Wise or Heschel, or,
Heschel's none of those people at all. Which is, there's always the question of great people and why great people come and don't come. But
I once said we
Israel,
should have a chief rabbi. I thought Yitz Greenberg would be perfect, but it's
he was kind of disappointing in the end. No, but it's a real problem. It really is. You think back, and there were real leaders. You think back in the ZOA, the old ZOA, there were leaders who, whether it's Jack Tocino, all these people, they were leaders. Just nobody now. I can't think of anybody.
people are
Um,
afraid. People are afraid to speak out. Rabbis certainly are in their pulpits, on either side. That's why I'm clearly, I I have moral clarity in my message. It's nuanced in some ways, but I'm not afraid to speak out because I'm not in a pulpit at the moment. I could go to No Kings on Shabbat because I didn't have to do services for one thing. And I think more rabbis need to have the courage to speak out. In my mind, right now, it's to oppose Trump and to try to bring unity, in the opposition forces, but also to promote Israel, or at least to help people understand what Israel has gone through.
I mean, we
I mean,
have
it's hard.
we've had a fair number of anti-Israel rabbis, particularly in the Reform movement over the last decade. Also, doesn't help.
Well, a lot of anti-government and anti-Bibi rabbis, to be sure. But I think even they would say, we're not anti-Israel. People have accused, it's very easy to accuse someone of being anti-Israel when they oppose a certain policy. But, we have to be sort of careful about that. Just like saying anti-Semitism, when it's
Right,
anti-Zionism.
right.
Yeah,
No, absolutely. But the lines sometimes get very gray,
they
and
do.
and
They
that's the
do.
problem. And I'm sorry when for instance, that last decision by Mamdani about not allowing to veto legislation to stop demonstrations outside schools. I mean, really? Even
It would have
he
been
even
easy.
he
It
even
was a,
lost he even lost the Satna, and which was his one
uh,
Jewish supporters he lost in this decision. Um,
he's not he hasn't made a mistake every time he's made a decision since becoming mayor. I mean, I haven't followed it as closely as someone living in the city would, but he's made mistakes. Um, he's missed opportunities, to miss opportunities, I guess. But I still think the greatest danger is not coming from the left. And I don't see the left as endangering Jews who are praying in synagogues as much, but I do see Israel protesters being a real threat. Anti-Israel protesters outside synagogues in New York, certainly, the Hamas related
but
protests.
right. So look, we have two real threats, in my opinion. One is, of course, what you just mentioned, and the anti-Israel that often include Palestinian Americans or just Palestinians or others whose hatred is real. In other words, I've always been against, the Israelis say, oh, if only the Palestinians would all leave. And leaving aside whether that be good and bad for Israel, I said it'd be terrible for world Jewry. All we're going to do is send out people who hate us to different parts of the world. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. But we have this other concern. I mean, I've heard serious political analysts say that Tucker Carlson's running for president.
Oh yeah,
And,
yeah.
the thought that someone with his views, and his views are clearly anti-Semitic. They're not just
Oh,
anti-Israel. They're
it's
clearly totally
replacement
anti-Semitic.
theory, absolutely. And
Straight,
I
straight.
think he's now he knows, and he can sense the political winds. He knows that this is the time to abandon Trump. So he's doing it. But he's doing it in a way that he can then later blame the Jews for bringing us into the Iran war, which of course he opposes.
Right.
and he's going to blame Jews for everything.
No, it's without a doubt. And I just, I think 20 years ago it wouldn't work. Now I fear it will work.
Yeah, I do
That's the
think that.
reality. And I think for better or for worse, as much as American Jews don't want to um, realize it, the anti-Israel feeling that exists in the population at large also gets attached to some extent to American Jews, whether they should be or not, it attaches because American Jews have supported Israel over generations. So we see it going the other way, and I think it's someone asked me last night where I was speaking, is there a future for American Jewry? I hemmed and hawed a little bit because I don't like giving a straight answer because frankly I don't know obviously, but it was, I think yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, I think I wrote about it yesterday. Yesterday was the anniversary of the famous letter that was sent by the Dutch West Indies company to Stuyvesant that said you had to allow Jews to settle in New York. And that was more than a few hundred years ago, but that began the American Jewish community, which has been a unique experience for Jews forever. There's never been a community like the American Jewish community in the diaspora. And yet, while there's been anti-Semitism, as we know, whether it was in during the Civil War, or of course the quiet anti-Semitism that didn't allow us to go to hotels and all of those in the late 19th century, and the anti-Semitism that didn't allow Jews in before World War II, there's never been the blatant anti-Semitism that we're beginning to see at the moment. And
It's it's gotten worse, and and sometimes paranoia isn't imagined; it's real. But one thing I want to sort of throw at you here, I've studied the Holocaust as you have, and I was feeling that 70 years after a trauma, usually that's when there's a burst of creativity in Jewish history. We've seen that after the temple's destruction, etc. It's a generalization, but I sensed that what happened, the wound, the trauma of the Holocaust was not healing, but it was beginning to move to another phase when October 7th happened. And that just sort of ripped up the Band-Aid and made it impossible for, a full recovery or a regeneration or a chance for Judaism to take root again and begin to grow, and for Israel not to move on we're never going to move on from the Holocaust, but to begin to find something new, some new hope. And so I thought about Anwar Sadat, a man who attacked Israel and nearly destroyed it in 1973. 4 years later, he gets off a plane in Tel Aviv and immediately transforms the psyche of Israelis and all Jews everywhere to the point where we so believed in hope and in peace that it was almost impossible to imagine after this man had tried to destroy us. This man who also was involved in the Holocaust in a small way. Could a Sadat happen now? That's what I'm after October 7th. Is Israel in a place where, and I don't know who that person is. We've already said there's no American leader who could encourage peace in that kind of way. But if, like a Jimmy Carter way, who ended up being problematic in other senses, but certainly with Sadat and Menachem Begin, were able to create this atmosphere of progress and peace. I don't know that that could happen now, but if it could, I think the Saudis, as much as I don't trust them and love them, could be part of that package. And I think Bennett, you know, coming from the right as he did, could help. I mean, I don't think he'd do it right away like Begin, but we need a Sadat.
see, the problem is we need a Palestinian Sadat, and we never had
Yeah.
a Palestinian Sadat. This conflict could have ended if there had been a Palestinian Sadat who wouldn't be killed. And I say
Well,
that because,
Barghouti was the name that
well,
you all.
maybe people were talking about it, but we really don't know what Barghouti really believed for sure. He talked a good talk to foreign media. He might have been, but
Wasn't
then we don't know.
Arafat. Yeah.
It wasn't Arafat for sure, not Arafat, and it hasn't been Abbas. I mean, they
Yeah.
can't even they forget giving the speech in the Knesset. They couldn't even agree, and that's the part that drives me a little bit nuts in terms of the left in America, etc., assuming that the Palestinians have had no agency throughout this conflict. And the Palestinians have had agency throughout the conflict and have said no. They've never been willing to accept anything but the full everything, and which everything
Never took
basically
yes
includes
for an answer, as
right.
Stephen said.
They wanted destruction. So that's what could end the conflict. Israelis who are suspicious, who don't trust the Palestinians, who don't trust the Arabs. If there was a Palestinian Sadat who came and said, "End of conflict. We renounce the right of return. We'll take some compensation, whatever it is. We don't want anything else. This will be the end of the war between us. And here's a negotiated peace. We'll get maybe less than we'd like, but we'll get a lot, and that will be it." But there isn't anyone like that. They'll be killed. That's the
Right. Well,
reality.
and and Bibi did his best to make sure there wouldn't be anyone. Not that there
Well, okay, but
was,
that there
but
was.
yeah,
That's the whole point. I mean, Bibi, don't forget, when he first came back to power, he was pressured by Obama. He even stopped all settlements, and Abbas refused to come to the table.
he
And
said
by the
two
time,
states. Bibi said, at one
yes,
point, yeah,
Bibi was being forced, whether he liked it or not, but there was no Palestinian partner even then. So that's
yeah.
what's
But I
look.
just, I cling to that hope that people do change. I think that at our heart, our song is Hatikva. Jews want to hope. I think we've learned not to hope foolishly. And maybe Oslo was a little foolish, a lot foolish, perhaps, but it also was destroyed by those forces that wanted to destroy it. Um, there's I
I don't think Oslo was foolish. Oslo was an attempt, and Rabin understood, and Paris understood there was no guarantees. And we needed to make the attempt to find a way whether we can reach a solution with the Palestinians. And the result was Hamas came to power. Hamas, throughout the process, blew up buses and everything else, and therefore we didn't reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians. But I can still remember when I was a young soldier, which makes it a few years ago, that I met a soldier whose father fought in the War of Independence. And I said to myself back then, I can still remember, think I was close to Russian Ikra for whatever reason. And I said to myself, I need to make sure that I can look my children in the eyes of my children, excuse me, and say we did everything we could. We did everything we could to make sure that we reached peace. I can't guarantee it. I only think there's a 50% chance even then that we can reach a peace agreement, but we need to be able to look in the eyes of our children and say we did everything we could. Well, all three of my children have served already. They're all out of the army. One
yeah,
still does reserve duty, but they're all out of the army. And now it's my grandchildren at this point to be able to do that. I think we always have to do it. I think we always have to take risks for peace. Understand thoughtful risks. And of course, October 7th changed. You talked about the Holocaust on October 7th. The connection is that after October 7th, we really, really realized that there's some people who really, really hate us and will
yeah.
do anything as much,
Mhm.
will do exactly what the Nazis did if they had a chance. And that was sort of a revelation on the bad side for Israelis. And I think for world Jewry generally, that people who were that evil were willing
Yeah.
to do exactly what the Nazis did.
So I'm
So
I'm this hopeful, optimistic American, I guess, and Jew. Who are the friendliest European countries to Jews right now? The Ukrainians, because their president is probably the leader of Europe at this point, and he's Jewish. But also anti-Semitism is down there. The Poles have improved. There's still issues, but they've improved dramatically. And now, God willing, the Hungarians are moving in a more democratic direction. And these were the places where the most Jews died during the
right.
Holocaust.
Right,
So
and the
the
Czechs, and of
Germans,
course, and Germans, of course, have been the
yeah,
strongest allies of Israel from forever. Yes,
history, as you know better than anyone, history does move. And it moves dramatic. I mean, I went to Vietnam a few years ago as a tourist and couldn't believe, that blood was being spilled in these same forests, not too long ago. It only doesn't change in Israel. It changed in Ireland. It doesn't change in Israel. I would I still
It took
believe
90 years in Ireland, don't forget. So don't,
we're
there's
we're
still
moving
time.
we're over a century now in Israel.
Right, okay.
But I still believe, and a century, well, 78 years, happy birthday. Last week was the most depressing Yom HaAtzmaut I've ever seen. I watched the Har Herzl ceremony, and oh my God, it was like North Korea. But anyway, I do believe, and I know we have to sort of wrap this up. If these two elections go well, on the heels of the Hungarian election, and destroy at the roots some of the illiberalism that has made life so horrible. Um, and if we in America can begin to understand the trauma that Israelis have experienced, and Israelis can begin to understand the trauma that a year of the Trump administration has caused not just American Jews, but the world, but especially America. And it's not to be, minimized at all. And maybe fall out of love a little bit with Trump. We'll teach you how to fall out of love with Bibi. We're really good at that. I see hope.
Okay. I'd like to end on that. It's always good to end on hope. People, when I speak, often say, "Can you give me a little hope?" So, okay, I'll take Rabbi Hammerman's hope, put it in a bottle, and see if I can spread it around a little bit. So let's hope for the best. Let's put it that way, Rabbi Hammerman. I want
Yeah.
to thank you. It has been great talking to you again,
Thanks so
and
much.
we'll do this again sometime soon. Thank you
Absolutely.
very much.
Maybe closer to the election. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Take
everybody.
care.
Thank
Be
you from
well.
Tel Aviv Diary and the Rabbi's Notebook. Uh, Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks.